I will straightly ask the most general question for the skeptical people who would say, okay, like we are in 21st century, what is magic, or what is transcending one's sensual experience? Or I don't know how you would formalize it.
I like to go through some main categories first, and I'll talk about the religious, the spiritual, and the mystical. Because I see these as three different categories, and a lot of people would look at them and just see them as one and brush them all off as one. But the religious would be, the first type of person would be someone who attends a church or a temple or whatever, and they don't necessarily have any cognition or experience of, you know, anything in another world. Like, so we have a physical world, and the idea is there is a metaphysical world, or a world beyond this world, and the roots of our world extend into that world. So someone who's religious doesn't have any experience of that, but they may have some beliefs of that. They read sacred scriptures, and that informs their ethics or their morality. And they go to church, and then they're a good person most of the time. It's like, that's the religious person. Next would be the spiritual person who wants to experience, say, the spirit, or experience something metaphysical, but there's no real system, no real, I like to say, no real development in a sense. Like, this is the new age. This is, you know, the crystal healing, dolphin dreaming channelers, people like that. You know, I see their spiritual search as a kind of a serpent biting its tail. They just always end up at the beginning. They always end up as, they're the same person at the end. And that's, in a sense, enriching for them. And I'm like, I don't want to knock them too much. It's like, you know, go for it. Be in the moment. I don't care. But I'm not really about that either. Then there's the mystic. And the mystic is something more deep. The mystic is someone who has experienced the other world, and there's something permanent. You could say the mystic is almost an upside down human, where we have our feet on the ground, they have their feet in the spiritual world. And so sometimes the mystic seems insane to us. But it's like, the problem with mysticism, how I use it is true mystics don't choose to be mystics. It's like something beyond the veil comes and grabs them and pulls them. And they don't will it necessarily. It's like, you know, the kind of becoming the slave of God kind of thing. But nonetheless, no, sounds a bit, you know, horrific, but there's a deep connection in them. And there's something real. And if you ever meet like a real mystic, even if you are a skeptic, it's like you can't help but like them or appreciate them, or that you do really see something beautiful in them. The emotion is real. They're not just some snake oil pastor preacher who's telling you, you know, you want to get into heaven, $29.95, son, like that. That's not a mystic at all. And so there's these different categories. And then there's a secret fourth one. And that secret fourth one is the person who wants what the mystic has, but you can't just wait around and wait for something to come and pull you. You want to do something. So there's an active path. There's a path where you do something, and the doing instrumentalizes or initiates a process that is then a mystical or magical process. And I would call that the path of magic. Now, the term is loaded, because it's like, what do you mean? Magic? You want to get money? You want to, your love potion? You want women? And it's like, no. So this is where we break magic into two categories: low magic and high magic. So low magic would be traditionally, you know, everything, the guy, you know, doing a spell for money or doing some ritual to get a woman. A lot of the stuff you see in medieval period, the medieval period in, in the West, grimoire magic and all of that, a lot of that is trying to enslave a demon to get you more money or something, or find buried treasure, or become invisible, or, you know, in a sense, you could just class all of that as low magic. But then you'll read something and there'll be this other thing happening. Like the Picatrix is a good example to use, because in the Picatrix there are all these weird magical practices to do this and that, and then there's just this one, I think in book 3 chapter 6, there's all of a sudden this spell to get the perfect nature, and it's almost metaphorical. It says to like dig a hole, and you go into the hole and you need to take a light with you, but the winds will blow out your light, And so you need to create a kind of a glass, an alchemist glass, if you will, to contain the light so you can reach the bottom. And when you reach the bottom, the winds will cease. And then it opens up into these like 4 chambers, and you can go and you find the perfect, and you're like, what the hell is this? And if you contemplate that, it's like, I'll find a deep hole. What does that mean? Deep hole into the earth. It go into yourself. And what happens when you close your eyes? Well, your mind goes crazy. And so that's the winds trying to blow out the light, blow out your consciousness, the light. So you have to be able to guard against the winds, your thoughts, as you go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then there is actually a bottom, something that you strike and you hit, and you're able to then enter into a conversation with something deeper into yourself. So in a more modern parlance, you could connect this to something like Jungian psychology with the active imagination, or the aim of active imagination to connect with different parts of your psyche that you may be unconscious to, but are nonetheless processes within you that are processes that are there, but they're autonomous. You don't will these thoughts. These thoughts are autonomous. They happen within you, but you can, because they're autonomous, you can kind of connect them, or you can kind of become conscious of them and connect them. So there is a element which appears to be psychological. Where this changes into something more magical, well, that is something more where you become more philosophical, and it's like you can live in a world of materialism. And when I say material, I mean metaphysical materialism, where, nothing existed, and then Big Bang happened, and then everything existed, and then dead matter rearranged itself and magically became life, and then life magically became complex and consciousness happened. That's the basic that's the basic dogma of materialism. There are other, you could say, metaphysical presuppositions. There's dualism, there's panpsychism, there's idealism, but mainly the crux is consciousness is more fundamental. It's either consciousness is the first thing and matter is an illusion, or at the very least, consciousness and matter are have a weird dual nature, and they're 2 phenomena that mirror each other. And when you accept that principle, then things to do with the mind, things to do with interacting with the world, when you look back at these ancients, or when you look at these books that claim to be magical, or authors that claim that, old philosophers that talk about, rationalism, Plato, but then all of a sudden they'll start talking about daimons and archons and angels and gods, lowercase g. You're like, it starts to make a little sense that the world is full of gods, that yes, there is a part of your mind that is you, or there's something that's you, but you are a being in the world, and there's a kind of the world is speaking back to you. But it's just that your conscious mind is like a filter. And so via doing certain practices, ritualistic practices, certain trance, certain meditative practices, doing certain things, you can gain access to that conversation that's happening through all of nature. And when I say nature, I mean, the nature with a capital N, the world, the cosmos, everything. Everything is in this constant dialogue, and that's what we're trying to jack into. That's the gnosis, that's the knowledge we want to partake in. Not just the knowledge of the senses, not just a deductive reason. We want illumination. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. So different than the lower kind of magic, in which we are trying to bring something to our already established life and prisoning a demon. Was that the...
Yeah, like lower magic is basically technology, is a kind of a technology you could look at. It's like, I have a subjective desire, I'm going to push a button and make that thing happen. And I never really liked that definition of magic. Like some people say, what is magic? It is the will extrapolated onto the world, and it's your will, becoming objectified in the world. But I never liked that, because it's like, oh, I'm thirsty, and I ask my friend to get me a glass of water, and then he brings me a glass of water, and oh, look, now I quench my thirst. I willed that to happen. That's magic. No, it's not. I mean, sure, you could look at it like that, but...
I can also imagine someone who is, let's say, skeptical about magic would be more like despising this sort of magic, but when they would hear that someone is only interested in transcending their existing condition and trying to know something deeper, or getting into this dialogue that you mentioned with the already existing stuff that the consciousness was blocking, then they might be more sympathetic to this. In Islamic tradition, for instance, there are these people that they call mejzup. They're basically the guys who turn out mad in relation to their love for the gods. And when, for instance, they say something problematic for an ordinary believer, let's say I am playing with the beard of the gods, they're not getting completely negative about these claims, and they're like, okay, this guy only has a different way of perceiving the world than we have. So I am interested in this higher version, in that sort of genuine expectation from the world to have something further. And as much as I understood, your claim is that this way, in comparison to the other one, which you say is similar to technology, is about changing one's life. And what?
Yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with it.
Yeah,
it's just low magic.
And what would be the consequence, or what might one expect from having this higher sort of magic? What would be the goal? Or I understand that it is about getting in touch with something higher than oneself, but what is the thing to be expected? Let's say I am interested in this, I am convinced, and I will start today. But what is the thing that I have to expect?
So that's interesting, because I have a more personal goal, but which may not fit with some people. But maybe we can talk about that if you want to. But I would say, in a more general sense, it's interesting. There's this thing called the goal of the wise. And it appears, in a sense, to kind of... It appears to have a kind of, you have the eyes of God kind of thing. The concept seems to have to do with a relationship with time. So in the same way that you look around a room and you see objects, I don't know, this is an object you can see. You look around your room and you see objects. The highest goal would be your consciousness unfolds in a way that moments in time become like objects that you see. And so this is for the Western esoteric tradition in a sense specifically. And the reason why is, when you think about that, what does that imply? It implies that you become a prophet. Okay. So for them, the highest sense is prophecy. But what does that really imply? They want to become a being with a chronology outside of time and space. So there's some kind of, if you want to be romantic, there's like a relationship with eternity they want to have. They want to be like a direct channel from this temporal world of change to the unchanging world of being. That's what they're trying to do. That's the ultimate aim. And that's the ultimate aim of magic.
Would you say there is, I think you would say, but I still want to ask, like a psychological aspect about this, like an underlying anxiety maybe about the temporal conditions of a human, as I am limited in a space and time, and I will always be limited in this life. And when I will die, if I believe into God, I believe into another world where I will be like punished, or will be in a heaven, or I will just decease and I will not be anymore. And with this sort of approach to life, one might also expect that within this life I will have an access to what is eternal and non-changing.
Yeah, that's exactly it, actually.
Okay.
It's like almost an angst embedded in them. Like, once again, it's those things that I talked about before, the religious, the spiritual, the mystic, they're not, there's sometimes interbleeding between the two. Those categories are categories I just made. In some level, on some level, they're quite arbitrary, but they're just categories that help kind of show a certain thing. But all those are our tendencies. And there is, and not one tendency is wrong. Like, there are the religious people, they're fine. They don't really need to know. They appreciate the sacred scriptures and then they live their life. Cool. But there's some people who have this burning angst, like within them, this anxiety towards death or something. And you just want to know. You want to know, you thirst. It's like you're continuously thirsty and just nothing quenches the thirst. Not philosophy, not the words of the wise, not science. Nothing they do will ever quenches their thirst. And it's like this path is for them.
It's really interesting when you put like this, because I don't know, something about it is really appealing for anyone who would be interested in philosophy, I think. Because
yeah.
This is basically the goal. I mean, you want to transcend the given conditions and you want to understand things as they are, or how you would put it, like noumenal world, or
exactly. That's the problem with Kant. Kant saved metaphysics by proving, phenomena and noumena. There's the noumenal world, but he closed the doors. He said, yeah, there's a noumenal world, but you can't see it. So the occultists are basically people who say, actually, and they attempt. Whether you think they make it or not, I respect them because they make the attempt.
And can you elaborate on some of the schools that are contemporary now?
Yeah, so in the West, there's a lot of kerfuffle and a lot of controversy, but a lot of it, I should say, it comes out of a relationship with Freemasonry. But I'll mention the main three. The main three are Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, and the Fourth Way. Now, there's things attendant to that, like Neoplatonism and Hermeticism, but those three are like the Trinity, in my opinion. With Rosicrucianism, you have the manifestos in the 1600s popping out, and after those manifestos, you see certain societies appearing in Germany and France over a period of time, in England and even in Italy. There are some, well, especially in Italy, actually all over in Eastern Europe as well. But once again, I come from an English-speaking country. We don't hear much about the Eastern European ones, especially because, after the Second World War, communism, they didn't really like occultism either. And so there's one, if I can just go off on a quick tangent, there's a book called Tarot Majors by G.O.M. Meebs. And it was this legendary book because the story behind it was there was a Rosicrucian school in St. Petersburg, and the secret invisible master who ran the entire school was the head of the mathematics department in the University of St. Petersburg. But when Stalin took power and the Iron Curtain came down, everyone's houses got raided and everyone killed, and everything from that school was lost, except for one thing. 2 women left earlier at a previous time, 2 students of G.O. Meebs, and they took his book, The Tarot Majors, to Brazil. And so there was this book that was kind of talked about that no one and so eventually it was found, a Brazilian kind of translation, and that was translated into English. And so like in 2020, we finally got that book. But like this legendary, anyway, the whole point in that is we don't know much about the Eastern stuff, Eastern Slavic kind of those guys. But in the English-speaking sphere, what we got was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So through Rosicrucianism, some German Rosicrucian schools, this Freemasonic, because, if you think about it, the Freemasons as an institution, it was a very good place to organize things. So people who have interests could just organize. So a Masonic lodge at one time started a new charter and everyone joined. And if you have esoteric friends, they all join and it becomes almost like an esoteric club. And so 3 Freemasons started something called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And this school lasted very short period of time in the grand scheme of things and completely dissolved, but its influence has just permeated throughout the English-speaking world. Like I was telling you before, it's like people nowadays will, if they are into magic, they do Golden Dawn sometimes without knowing it. Like if you're into paganism, there are so many pagan schools that are like, it's just the Golden Dawn, but with a Celtic paint job or with a Nordic paint job or a Greek paint, and they just don't realize. But it's like this Golden Dawn method is there, and that broke off into different schools: the Brotherhood of Light, of the Unfortunate, or Inner Light, the Builders of Aditum by Paul Foster Case, all of these different kind of names, but they're all somewhat structured around the Golden Dawn. Now, the other big name I should mention that's kind of in that Hermetic Rosicrucian world, so Rosicrucianism, their style of doing things, I should mention in their manifestos, they talk about reforming the world and the church, etc., etc. But there's three things that they study. They say they'll do it through alchemy, Kabbalah, and magic, or theurgy, theurgia. And so those three things are primarily what's practiced. So these schools that sometimes call themselves Rosicrucian or sometimes Hermetic, but there's a guy called Franz Baden who was a Czech Hermeticist. And one of his books got translated into German. And because of that, it got translated into English, and it spread out. And so there's these two kind of mainline schools. It's like the Golden Dawn school, and then there's the like Badenist school. But other than that, then you have OTO, which is more Crowleyan. Although there's pre-Crowley OTO, that's still around. The work of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley being, he took over head of the OTO after one of the founders, Theodor Roos, died. And so the OTO is the other school in that kind of trilogy, although Rosicrucians don't consider the OTO necessarily Rosicrucian. But other than that, you have Max Heindel's, Rosicrucian Fellowship. You have Ancient Mystical Order of the Rosy Cross, which has an interesting history because it was a kind of a kindergarten school that came out of a European Rosicrucian school, and kindergarten Rosicrucian school started in America, but then the Second World War happened, and so the European part kind of died off, and the American part got these huge numbers, then came back into Europe. So Amorc Europe, then remnants of the Rosicrucians in Europe kind of mass joined a bunch of Amorc lodges. So some of Amorc in Europe is quite different from Amorc in the English-speaking world. The Ancient Mystical Order of the Rosy Cross, that's another Rosicrucian. So you have all these different Rosicrucian schools, and nowadays they kind of get along, but for a while they were like, no, I'm the real Rosicrucian. No, I'm the real Rosicrucian. They did a lot of that stuff, but they all have different tendencies. Some were more mystical, some were more magical. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was more of a magic-oriented practice, whereas the Amorc was more mystical, you could say. But that's Rosicrucianism. Other than that, you have Theosophy, which has its own which has had its own tragic downfall, or it's still around today. But that was started by the Madame Blavatsky, who, funnily enough, is also a Russian. She was a Russian woman, and she, I think, is criticized a lot nowadays. But for being too Eastern, in a sense, she took stuff from the East. But she was one of the first kind of pioneers, like for her time, and she was a woman to do it. She did all right for her time, I would say. I kind of forgive Blavatsky for her mistakes. But nonetheless, she also participates in a bit of the obscuring of certain things. Like in her works, she'll say, like, I got this from a secret manuscript that only has 2 copies in the entire world, and it was in a private collection by a friend I know. So, source, trust me, bro. Like that kind of thing. She does that a little bit, but nonetheless, what are her main sources? Her main sources are Neoplatonism, the work of Jacob Boehm, Paracelsus, the alchemist, Eliphas Levi, and also the Zohar. In fact, there are some nowadays in academic scholarship. There's a lot of academic scholarship done in the occult, Western esoteric tradition nowadays. There's some people who have read Blavatsky and who would even say that her magnum opus, The Secret Doctrine, is like 70% Zohar. So it's like she's clearly been influenced by that book quite a bit, but that's a lot of Western influence, those things. So the Zohar being one of the foundational works of Kabbalah in the West. That's a lot of influence in there. And so she created the society, the Theosophical Society, which aim was to synthesize philosophy, science, and all religion. Let's say she didn't succeed. After she died, I think, how should I put this? Her greatest critic was a guy named René Guénon, who actually he converted to Islam later in life. He was René Guénon, just as an interesting side tangent. He was a Frenchman, French philosopher, part of a kind of a Rosicrucian school, but then he wanted a real tradition, and so I think he moved to Egypt, learned the language, and joined a Sufi school, and was actually kind of adopted by the people there and was accepted by the community. So kind of respect to him. You see a lot of guys nowadays who say they're Buddhist and they've never, they meditated once. Like he took his path seriously, at least. But he was a big critic of Madame Blavatsky. But I remember one of the things he said about her was she was a true genius, which is something her successors unfortunately did not share. So that was a really great insult he gave her. And it's like, yeah, she was a true genius. She was really smart, true genius. When you read her works, it's like she clearly had a literary IQ of at least 160. She was incredibly intelligent. Whether that makes her a snake oil salesman or legit is another debate. But Guénon didn't like her too much. But what's unfortunate is the people who came after her, didn't match her in that take. And a lot of, the Theosophical Society kind of degenerated after that. Rudolf Steiner, who originally came from that, broke off. And there's lots of breaking off after that. Rudolf Steiner basically became a Rosicrucian after he left. And so you get the Anthroposophical Society, which is another school of the West. So you have Theosophy, Rosicrucianism, and then the fourth way, which is the works of Gurdjieff, who you've heard of Gurdjieff?
Yeah. Actually, I have one scholar who was really interested in Gurdjieff, and
nice.
He made us read him, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, I was
one?
Around 19-year-old, I think.
Oh.
If I'm
which book did you read?
It was the one about meeting with remarkable people.
Yeah. That's his second book.
Okay. And I really enjoyed it. I was forcing my girlfriend back then to read it also.
It's a classic.
I remember some stories about his time in the Turkic countries, in Turkmenistan and the mountains. And he's talking about all these interesting people who have their own sort of wisdom and approaching to things and so on. It was really influential.
He's a very interesting guy. He's very interesting because he came in, with his own kind of lexicon, his own language. He avoided using any terms that other people used so you don't automatically associate things and go, oh, I know what he's talking about. He wanted you to pay attention. So he has this very interesting way of speaking. And he's quite mysterious because no one knows where he got his stuff from. In one place, he says something like, from India, we get philosophy, from Egypt, we get theory, and from Persia, we get practice. And so you kind of hear from that, and it's like, oh, what does that mean? So it's it seems like he went to India and maybe connected with some Vedantic schools, but didn't quite, get the rest of yoga. And then he went to, and when he says Egypt, what does he mean by Egypt? I kind of think maybe he met either some Sufi schools, but I think, some Sufi schools I've observed are quite Neoplatonic in themselves, or they have a Neoplatonic backbone. So I think he got because his cosmology is quite Neoplatonic. So I think he got the theory from that, and then the practices from Persia, we get something practical. And so, maybe some Sufi school, some Tibetan school, there's one of his students, J.G. Bennett, who was, one of those British spy kind of guys who, knew a bunch of languages. He claims that he confirms Gurdjieff knew Tibetan. So he had this idea that Gurdjieff was in Tibet and had gotten some early Tibetan Buddhist teachings. So Gurdjieff seems to be a synthesis of all these different things. And of course, when people would ask Gurdjieff where he got his things from, he would always say something different. Like there was one story he said at one point where he was like, he was in a group of truth seekers when he was a kid, and they all made a pact with each other, because the whole thing about secret societies is you make an oath to not speak about the secrets. So these truth seekers, this group, they made an oath to each other that they would all go off to different schools, learn the teachings, and then come back and all break their oath simultaneously with each other. So one went off to a Sufi school, one went to a yoga school, one went to a Buddha school, one went to an alchemy school. And, you know, they all came back together, and then they all taught each other what they learned in all the different schools. And it's like, that probably didn't happen, but he would always come up with a different story of like where he got his system from. But he has a completely unique, a very unique system of cosmology and internal development, I should say, of like how the human works and what you need to do to kind of organize it and then go deeper and then, you know, crystallize something new, some new opportunity to become. His kind of concept is, you know, the highest that a man can become is something that becomes like a brain cell in the mind of God. And so you become a cell. So God is like a spiritual organ that exists outside of time and space. And he waits for you to become a cell in that kind of organism. So God, if you're able to achieve the work, God increases in a way and becomes more powerful and more knowing and more loving. And so it actually, in basically achieving the work, you actually aid the world in that sense, because then the world emanates out from God. It's very weird. He's very strange. But he came to Russia and he taught students. And then he moved from Russia down into France. And then through France, he got students that went to England and America. And you have all these names: J.G. Bennett, A.R. Orage, Ouspensky. Ouspensky is the big one. Ouspensky was Ouspensky is a genius in his own right. And if Ouspensky never met Gurdjieff, Ouspensky would still be remembered as a mystic in his own right. But Ouspensky met Gurdjieff and studied under him, and then kind of developed and really represented his teachings really well. Those two men had a complete falling out at one point, but then Ouspensky wrote this book, In Search of the Miraculous. But I think he died, and then it was published. And Gurdjieff lived longer, and Gurdjieff actually got a copy of In Search of the Miraculous. And when he read it, he said, "Before I read this book, I hated this man, and now I've read this book, I love him." And so it's like, you know, there's a bit of remorse there in the end for their broken relationship. But Ouspensky really understood Gurdjieff like no one else, even though they had a falling out. Ouspensky's books are probably the better introduction to Gurdjieff's work than actually Gurdjieff is. So Ouspensky is very important. But you have this fourth way kind of school in the West. And I would say the problem is the Theosophists, the Rosicrucians, and the fourth way, they don't really talk to each other. But via studying them, you can kind of triangulate something that they're all trying to get at. And that's what I'm interested in. That's what my project is.
And I am curious about something. Now, we talked about the possible motivations for a human to pursue such knowledge. And what about the gods, or the being that is creating or causing this world or emanating? We have like narratives such as, okay, now I forgot where I come from, or I limit myself, I block my consciousness, or now I am trying to reconnect with something. And why this supreme being is getting into pieces that are no longer knowing where they are coming from. Or I know this is like a really big question, and probably answers.
This is a little complicated to answer, but I'll use some technical terms. I'll use the term panentheism. But to explain that, let me explain just for people who don't know. When I arrived at this independently, and then I read what panentheism is, and I was like, oh my God, you know, a philosopher who lived 300 years ago figured out and explained something far better than I could ever. But like, you know, that kind of thing. But it's this how my view on God changed over time. I'll take you through it. So at first, I had a very simplistic view of God, and I like to describe it as two circles. So imagine two circles, one above the other. And the one on top says God, and the one on the bottom says the world. And this, I was raised, Anglican Christian or whatever. It's even the lame kind of Christian. Like, not even, at least Catholics do exorcisms or something. Anglicans are lame. But it's just like God is this thing above the world. It's separate from the world. And it's like this tyrant on the throne. And like the world is divorced from God, and you got to go. How do you connect with God? You got to go to the church. You got to go to the priests. There's got to be some intercessor, some bridge to get between there. And it's just, Now, a reaction to that is the next symbol.
By the
So
way,
the next
as a
symbol.
small comment, this was how Kojève, the Hegelian guy, explained the Platonic God, like two circles,
Okay.
and the one in the upper part is, in a sense, connected by its own rotation, but the
Okay.
world that is emanated from it is no longer getting access to the upper part, and
Oh, that's
only
interesting.
through like these circles getting one together, the one
Okay.
will remember. Just
Yeah, I'm getting to that. I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
So now we go on to the second symbol. The second symbol is a single circle. And in the
Okay.
single circle, it says God equals the world. And this in the West is all of the hippie New Age people. This is, you are God. You are
Yeah.
God. Don't worry about it. There is no path. You just need to be. And I hate these people, but I understand them because they, in a sense, are just reacting against the tyrant on the throne. That's too tyrannical for them, at least with when they think, with nature and the God and the world and everything being one, at least they can have a more intimate connection, But there's no work. There's nothing to do. There's awakening is just a state of mind, bro. You just change your opinion. And it's like, namby-pamby, hippie bullshit, whatever. Sorry if I'm not allowed to swear.
You're
Now,
alone.
The third symbol is, imagine a large circle, and within the large circle is a smaller circle. And the large circle has the words God, and the smaller circle within it says the world. So what do you have here? In this sense, God, in one aspect, is unknowable. Ooh, let me just close my window. I'm not sure if my microphone was picking up that. In one sense, God is unknowable, but there is a part of God that is not divided from God, but the part of God that is in the world. In fact, the world itself is made up of God. So when you have a hierarchy of beings, you could say, the essences of plants and animals, and then you have human souls, and then above humans, you have whatever, archons, daimons, angels. Maybe you have lowercase g gods, lowercase g. Capital G God is not a being at the top of the hierarchy. Capital G God is the entire hierarchy, is the substance that makes up the entire hierarchy. So in this way, I can have my cake and eat it. I can accept that, yes, there is a transcendental God, but also, yes, there is an immanent God, because I can see God in nature, I can feel God in nature, and that thing that I feel in nature, I also feel in me. And this is where you get into then esoteric traditions, where it's a weird kind of, in the end, it is not dualism. The attainment of the work is everything is one, but it starts off as it's interesting. Dualism is like a ladder. You have a transcendent God and an immanent God, and it's like a sacred marriage between the two is the key to the work. And so, well, depending on what your reason for existence is, but nonetheless, let's just presume that there is a reason for existence. Existence happens and different beings arise out of, you could say, the waters of creation, and they organize themselves in a hierarchy, in a sense. And so these different beings, as they arise, they experience life, they experience being as an individual. And there becomes order, there becomes, society, all of those things happen. But the question isn't about where an essence lands in the hierarchy. The question then becomes, can you move up and down the ladder? If you're born on the rung of a human, can you ascend to the rung of a god? Or can you just, if you behave badly, do you descend to the rung of an animal? What happens? What's it all about? And I mean, you can also accept that some people, if they die, they don't return. They just dissolve into what? Into nothingness, but back into the unknowable God. So people who say you dissolve into God when you die, they're correct. People who say you reincarnate, yeah, you're also correct. Some people probably do return as animals. Some people may, heroes and sages probably incarnate or develop and move up the rung of being and become something else. I like this. This is called panentheism. And so I like it because it lets me have my cake and eat it. I can look at any system in the world and I can just shoehorn it into panentheism, basically. So that's how I kind of look at, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, actually.
Yeah, you're right.
But that's how I kind of look at the world. So different people, some people are like, oh, I'm not coming back. And I'm like, okay, good for you. I have different motives, in essence. I have different motives.
And in this third picture, we are talking about God. One way, at least, to approach to God is as this transcending being, which is also the substance. And
so you can know it as substance, but there's always a part of it that is unknowable or ineffable, as they say.
And would you say that there's also a subjectivity for this God, or like a will of the God?
That's interesting. I mean, like if there, I'm not sure if you would call it of the God, but I would say there is individual, how they say you have a mind, but then there's a universal mind. I would say as you have an individual will, there's also a universal will. But I'm not sure if you would connect that to the absolutely unknowable transcendent God. That may be beyond that, but there is some universal will. And you could say a part of the work is, you have a false identity. And a part of that is to get beyond the lie, to connect to your true individual will, and then align your individual will with the universal will. That is also another way of looking at the work.
And through this sort of understanding, I have this doubt for a really long time with me. On one side, we despise these people who wants to, get rich, like having love potions and so on. And with this way of understanding, what you're now mentioning, I'm afraid maybe some of these doctrines can make someone entirely go out of this life that we are living. You see where I'm going? For instance, there is a war in my country, but okay, I am with this divine being and I no longer care for the others. So I am always curious about the relationship between living a life within a society and having some sort of understanding and mutual share with people in the world. And also you have a path that is beyond of what we are experiencing on the surface level.
Yes, so this is an interesting, and this is a controversial one that not many people I shouldn't say that not many people hold, but look, there are secrets that you keep, or ideas that you keep to yourself, but in essence, there is a path that is lived in life. This is the whole idea, talking of the fourth way. The first three ways is the way of the body, the way of the emotions, and the way of the mind. But those are ways that require you to move outside of life, to go into the hills, to go to an ashram, and then to focus on that one part and crystallize something with that in that way. But there is another part where you strike man on all sides at once. And this has to be done in life. And so this is tricky because you have to be kind of good at life first. You have to be pragmatic first. You can't be an all-powerful wizard that still lives in your mum's basement. You need to have a job. You need to have a vitality. You can't let you know, when a tyrant enters your town, you can't just be like, oh, you know, maybe it's just bad karma. No, it's like you fight the tyrant. It's like there's a vitality that comes with this sort of thing, like kind of being in life, and but living with an ethos and living to those principles. You could say the first step on the path of initiation is your life lived wisely. So you live in life, but there's a work that is done internally as you live in your life. And so it's one of these things. It's like maybe not a love potion, because that's just kind of weird and you're taking away someone's free will. But almost something to get money even may not be seen as a big thing. It's just like, you know, you get money and then what? And you donate it to charity or you help your family. It's like, whatever, you got to do what you got to do. It's just a pragmatic thing. You sort out your planetary body, the needs of your planetary body, but then you also seek self-perfection. And in seeking self-perfection, if you take that to the highest, you'll realize you come to a roadblock and you need to start seeking out, what would you call it, the laws of the universe. And once you have an understanding of the universe and you achieve a certain level of development within yourself, then the desire is to turn back and to help other beings who are a similar level to you to reach your level of development. And that's seems to be the game in life, this game in life. And so you can see almost like a dichotomy, like I'll say, like, there's like archetypal, in an archetypal sense, there's the mystic who's in the mountains, and then there's the alchemist who maybe live in a tower next to the Duke's mansion, but he's a man of the people. He helps people with his herbal remedies. You know, he does an astrological natal chart for someone. It's like the person is a part of the community still, but they're, you know, you could say that, no, I don't like using the term shaman, but it's like, you know, they're the town magician, the town magus that helps everyone out kind of thing. So that's still, there is this path in life. You're still a part of it, which this is a sticky thing because, you know, you need to sort yourself out. Well, you need money. Well, what do? You know, you start a business, but then your business consumes all of your time and you don't have enough time to deal to the internal work. Or, you know, you want to fight a tyrant and that gets everyone in the temple killed and all of the teachings are lost. Like, the discernment and balance required in the path within life is completely different from one of those paths that are non-existent in life. So the mystics that go to the hill, on one level, they see us as the people who are in life as, you could say, like frivolous, oh, you're making a mistake. You're too much in life. But in a sense, they're weak. Because they're so one-sided, if they came into life, there's something, they may be very developed in one way, but they're completely unbalanced in the other, and they would fall into temptation in one way or another. That's why they have to be in the hills. So although this path is very difficult in life, and you may not get as much as someone who's you know, out in the hills practicing, you know, for meditation for 6 hours a day and having experiences of the cosmos. You may not get as much as them, but what you get is real, and what you get should be permanent, like permanently chiseled into your soul, and you take that from life to life. And, you know, you rely on that thirst within you to keep you coming back to the work.
This part is for me really interesting because, you know, in like, for instance, Parmenides, you have this goddess teaches you the entire truth, but then she says, okay, I will also teach you the way of the mortals. Or in, you know, like, you go beyond the cave, now I see the sun, but it says that we have to go back to the cave. Although the people will belittle us, say, like, you are mad, you have no use. And also, like, for instance, in Nietzsche, like, more he
leaves, he goes to the town and they consider him a fool. Oh, we don't want this Superman, you can keep him. And then he leaves.
Yeah. And it is really nice to see this tension, you know, like, although you have the, like, supreme principles or have an access to something beyond, you still have to have some connection with the world, although the people will not understand it directly, maybe. And I like this like dual thing, if you may say, like sharing of the divinity kind of stuff.
In a sense, if you look at it philosophically, like with the fields of philosophy, there's like this string, this connection. So you have ontology, epistemology, ethics, and political science, but political philosophy. So your ontology and your epistemology will be connected, but there's also a way where your ontology and your epistemology will connect to your ethics, which is your ethos, how you live your life. So an occultist, will have a metaphysics, and they'll have an epistemology like, I know this through my illumination. And then this informs how they live life, but your ethos is something microcosmic. The macrocosmic variety is then, I have a way of how I live my life, but then how do I interact with people? Your ethics extrapolated into how you interact with people becomes like a politic. So a complete kind of occult philosopher, in a way, is like a philosopher who will have a complete ontology and epistemology and ethics and almost a political theory, although that's somewhat controversial. But a lot of occultists will have their idea of what a perfect city will be like the Abbey of Thelema, where you have an abbey where everybody who lives is completely free. There's only one law, do what thou wilt or something, or New Atlantis, which will be a paradise, or the City of the Sun and how it operates. I mean, the Rosicrucian utopia, it's like that's the political part of it, the political reform. There's that kind of essence to it as well. It's hard. It's not a politic that's, like a social justice kind of politic that's just drawn from political sciences. It's a politic that's interesting because it's drawn directly from spirituality.
I also remember they say that Hermes Trismegistus, the guy himself, built a city in Egypt with use of divinity and have the perfect city, which was really cool for me. Like this guy who is able to create gods building a city for humans.
All that has been lost. Although, perhaps there are some secret cities still around on the earth, but you got to find them. Yeah, we must awaken and become illuminated and seek them out.
Because like even the God, the most supreme, is still having a contact with the world and having being the source of actualization for everything. What is it for a human to detach themselves from the humans? See my point?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, once again, there may be some kind of tendency. Like I'm not dissing the Desert Fathers. They did their thing and they had experiences and wrote them down. And reading mystical texts can be valuable for an occultist. But in the end, you can't wait around for apotheosis. We're not waiting for God. We're assaulting. What do you call it? Assaulting the gates of heaven. You're knocking on the doors of heaven.